the service.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
TV's got little disruptions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. As you can see, we are being joined on Zoom by our service leader today, who is Matt Meyer. And I am happy to be with you today as well. Matt Meyer is a lifelong Unitarian Universalist with a long background as a musician and worship leader in UU congregations. Matt lives in Boston, but travels as an itinerant worship leader, bringing the good news of Unitarian Universalism to hundreds of congregations all over the country. He serves as the Director of Operations for Sanctuary Boston, a contemporary UU worship community with rockin' music and engaging worship. Matt's children's story, Desmond Gets Free, which you will hear in a few minutes, was published last year as a book by Skinner House Press. It just recently won a Nautilus Award for Social Justice in Children's Fiction. You can find more information about Matt Meyer on the back of your order of service or in your digital order of service. You can find links to follow Matt and get resources and inspiration for music and worship. You can order his children's book, Desmond Gets Free, and you can join in contemporary worship at Sanctuary Boston, which is Matt's home congregation, on Wednesday evenings. Our chalice lighting today are these words by Adrienne Marie Brown. Let us measure success by how many of us can say, I am living a life I don't regret, a life that will resonate with my ancestors, and with as many generations forward as I can imagine. I am attending to the crises of my time with my best self. I am of communities that are doing our collective best to honor our ancestors and all humans to come. Please rise in body or spirit and join me in saying our church's affirmation of covenant and in singing the doxologies in English and Spanish. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung. Through every land, by every tongue. De todos bajo el gran sol, surja esperanza, fe y amor. Verdad, belleza en la canción de cada tierra, cada voz. You may be seated. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Las Cruces. We welcome those of you who are in our sanctuary this morning, especially our youth and children, and those who are joining us via streaming technology. I'm Catherine Massey, your service associate today, a different role for me, as well as your director of music. Assisting us are Elwin Nunn on camera. No, not today, sorry. Michael Yaksho. Did I say that right, Michael? It's close enough, he says. Thank you, he's gracious. And Chris Neal Wallace on audio and Zoom. Our greeters today are Irene Schultz and Mark Sukantarak. Hospitality is offered today by the Visioning Action Team with Italian food by Chef Bill Fitzgerald. We are all delighted to be with you today. Unitarian Universalism has no creed or dogma. We are a covenant-based church, meaning that we agree to live in relationship with each other according to Unitarian Universalist principles and our congregation's covenant of right relations. We embrace diversity in all its forms. Everyone is welcome. You can learn more about our church at our website, uuchurchlc.org. If you're visiting us today, we'd like to meet you. If you're in the sanctuary, please rise, embody your spirit, and introduce yourself by telling us your name and where you are from. But wait until we bring the mic to you. Do we have any visitors in the sanctuary this morning?
Good morning. My name is Dove Flowers. I live here in Las Cruces, and I'm glad to be here today.
If you are visiting on Zoom, just turn on your mic and camera in order to introduce yourself. Any visitors joining us on Zoom? It appears not. Thank you. We're very pleased that you have joined our service today. Please fill out a visitor's card in the lobby or leave your email in the Zoom chat box so we can invite you to other services and activities at the church. If you're a shy visitor, this all applies to you. So please feel free to fill out a visitor's card or leave your email in the chat box on Zoom. You'll receive those invitations. And please join us after the service for coffee, refreshments, conversations, Italian food, and possibly staying for our visioning action activities. These are all outside the Religious Education Building, which is just down the breezeway, or stay on Zoom to visit on chat rooms.
In our chalice lighting, Adrienne Marie Brown redefined success in part by those of us who can say, I am attending to the crises of my time with my best self. And I am of communities that are doing our collective best to honor our ancestors and all humans to come. In that spirit, I'd love to share this story with you all called Desmond Gets Free. Now, Desmond the mouse lived in the most beautiful meadow in all the land. Every morning, Desmond would wake with the sunrise and spend the whole day long playing in that beautiful meadow. And every night, Desmond would go to sleep in the middle of the meadow under the beautiful starry sky above. One night, though, Desmond awoke to find that it was still dark out. He tried to roll over, get more comfortable, and go back to sleep, but something wasn't right. He could hardly move, and his tail was throbbing with pain. Reaching behind him, he felt that, there was some sort of huge boulder that seemed to have fallen just on his tail in the middle of the meadow. He tried pushing with all of his strength on this giant rock behind him, and he tried tugging on his tail with all of his might to get loose. And then he tried pushing and tugging and pushing over and over and over again. But it was no use. He was stuck. When he had just about given up, when he was just about out of breath, though, he saw another animal passing by through the grass. It was a tall giraffe. And so he called out, "Oh, giraffe, it seems that some sort of boulder has fallen just on my tail in the middle of the meadow. If you could use your powerful legs to push it even just a few inches in the other direction, I could go free. Well, the giraffe laughed at Desmond the way giraffes do. You silly mouse, it said. That's no boulder that's fallen on your tail. That's an elephant that's fallen asleep on your tail in the middle of the meadow. Well, in that case, asked Desmond, if you could just gently wake him up and just ask him to roll over even a few inches in the other direction, I could go free. I don't know about that, said the giraffe. I mean, surely you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like this. Well, said Desmond, I do not appreciate your neutrality. The giraffe wandered off, leaving Desmond alone again. So he tried shouting out with all of his voice to wake the giant elephant, but his little mouse voice was just too far away from those giant elephant ears at the way other end of that giant elephant body. Again, he tried pushing on the elephant with all of his strength, and he tried tugging on his tail to get loose, tugging with all of his might. And he tried shouting and pushing and tugging and tugging and pushing and shouting over and over and over again. And when he had just about given up again, he saw another animal pass by through the grass. This time it was a gazelle, and he called out, "Oh, gazelle, it seems that an elephant has fallen asleep on my tail in the middle of the meadow. If you could just gently wake it up and ask him to roll over even a few inches in the other direction, I could go free." I don't know about that, said the gazelle. I mean, surely you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like this. The gazelle wandered off, and Desmond said, almost to himself this time, I do not appreciate your neutrality. One last time, Desmond tried shouting with all of his voice. He tried pushing with all of his strength and tugging with all of his might. And he tried shouting and pushing and tugging and pushing and shouting over and over and over again, until he had just about given up for the last time, when he saw another animal pass by through the grass. This time it was another mouse, and when he called out, the mouse ran right over and introduced himself. He said, "My name is Nelson. What seems to be the problem?" Well, no sooner had Desmond explained the situation than Nelson ran all the way to the other end of that giant elephant body. And he shouted up to those giant elephant ears, "Excuse me! It seems you've fallen asleep on my friend's tail in the middle of the meadow. If you could roll over just a few inches in the other direction, he could get free." Well, the elephant heard Nelson's little mouse voice way down on the ground, but his voice was just a bit too small, and those giant elephant ears at the top of that giant elephant head, they were just a bit too far away. And to be honest, the elephant was just a bit too comfortable. He didn't budge. So Nelson thought for a moment before he ran back to Desmond, and he said, I think I might have an idea. Stay right here." And he ran into the grass, leaving a confused look on Desmond's face. And just when Desmond was starting to get worried again, Nelson emerged back through the grass, but he wasn't alone this time. He had found 3 other mouse friends. And each of them, they had done their jobs. They had found another 3 mouse friends. And that whole group of them, they ran all the way to the other end of that giant elephant body. And one mouse, she climbed up on the shoulders of another, and another climbed up on her shoulders. And one by one, they formed a whole mouse ladder all the way up the back of that giant elephant head. And at last, Nelson climbed up the shoulders of his friends one by one. And at last, he stood right at the opening of that giant elephant ear. And he shouted with his loudest voice, "Excuse me! It seems you've fallen asleep on my friend's tail in the middle of the meadow. Roll over just a few inches so he can get free." Well, his voice was just too loud and just too close to ignore this time. And so the elephant groaned a deep groan and rolled over just a few inches in the other direction. Nelson and his friends climbed carefully back down, and they met up with Desmond and the whole group of them. They spent the rest of that day playing together in the meadow. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who passed away just this year, has said that if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have already taken sides. You've taken sides with the powerful, and you've taken sides with the oppressor. Tutu said that if an elephant is standing on the tail of a mouse, the mouse will never appreciate your neutrality. Archbishop Tutu believed in a God who he said took sides, who took sides with the orphan and with the widow and with the oppressed everywhere. As Unitarian Universalists, we may or may not share a belief in that same God, but we have covenanted to build a world of justice and equity and compassion, and that means imagining a world very different from the one we see around us today. So it means that we come together in community to do together what we couldn't do alone, and to take sides for justice, to take sides for equity and compassion. And it means that we come together to side with love. May it be so, and may we make it so.
Express our care for each other is through this sharing of joys and sorrows. Another way we do this, I'm sorry. Matt, it's you again.
It's fine if we skip the sermon, but let's not skip any music. Well, this next song is an old traditional favorite, but with new words and also with a new melody. It goes like this. I'll invite you to sing along at home or in the congregation, wherever you are. Bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising. Day is breaking in my soul. Can we try that? Let's try it together. Bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising. Day is breaking in my soul. Rise up from morning slumber. Here we go. Rise up from morning slumber. Rise up from morning slumber. Rise up, morning slumber. Day is breaking in my soul. Rise up and hear your calling. Rise up and hear your calling. Rise up and hear your calling. Rise up and your calling. Day is breaking in my soul. Bright morning star arising. Morning star arising. Bright morning star arising. Day is breaking in my soul. Oh, lift your voice to heaven. Here we go. Oh, lift your voice to heaven. Lift your voice to heaven. Oh, lift your voice to heaven. Day is breaking in my soul. We'll build this faith together. We'll build this faith together. Build this faith together. We'll build this faith together. Day is breaking in my soul. Bright morning star arising. Morning star arising. Bright morning star arising. Day is breaking in my soul. Day is breaking. Day is breaking in my soul. One more time. Day Day is a breaking in my soul.
We didn't want to miss that. One of the ways we care for each other is through the sharing of joys and sorrows. Another way we do this is by lighting candles and silently saying to ourselves the joy, sorrow, or concern that we feel. As you listen to the music, which I will play by Kay Gardner, please come up and light a candle to express your joy or sorrow, or simply take time for reflection.
in the spirit of redefining success, defining it as living a life we don't regret, we offer this reading written by Brad Aaron Modlin called What You Missed That Day You Were Absent from 4th Grade. Mrs. Nelson explained how to stand still and listen to the wind, how to find meaning in pumping gas, and how peeling potatoes can be a form of prayer. She took questions on how not to feel lost in the dark. After lunch, she distributed worksheets that covered ways to remember your grandfather's voice. And then the class discussed falling asleep without feeling you had forgotten to do something else, something important, and how to believe the house you then wake up in is truly your home. This prompted Mrs. Nelson to draw a chalkboard diagram detailing how to chant the Psalms during cigarette breaks, and how not to squirm for sound when your thoughts are all that you hear. Also, that you have enough. The English sentence that day was that I am is a complete sentence. And just before the afternoon bell, she made the math equation look easy. The one that proves that hundreds of questions and feeling cold and all those nights spent looking for whatever it is that you lost and one person, they all add up to something. The song speaks to defining success by being a part of communities that are doing our best to address the crises of our time. It says, we shall be known by the company we keep. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round attend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the world. It is time now. What a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round attend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the world. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round attend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the world. It shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round attend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the world. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. I grew up just outside of Chicago, but I moved to Boston in the year 2000 to attend college and get a degree in hand drumming, of all things. I was following this dream I had at the time of being a touring musician. I wanted to play with some successful band, traveling the world, being in a different city every night with a different gig. And in my last semester at school, as I was preparing for graduation, I spent a lot of time fantasizing and imagining this life, this musician's life ahead of me. At just about that time in my very last semester, I stepped into this classroom in the percussion department where two of my teachers were talking to each other. One of them was talking about his schedule. He had just finished a 2-week concert tour of Morocco, playing with some incredible Middle Eastern band, and he was just about to head off to spend another 4 weeks touring Europe with a group called Simon and Garfunkel. Have you all heard of them? He pointed at a suitcase sitting in the corner. It was open, and this guy, as far as I could see, was living the dream. I was so in awe of that suitcase that got to travel with him, touring the whole world with these incredible musicians. Could there be a more perfect life than this, I imagined? I asked him, "Are you so freaking excited that you can hardly stand it?" And yes, I asked it just like this, without any chill. He just shook his head at me though, and he said, "Man, I just want to go home and see my kid." Now, I'm going to be honest with you. In that moment, I didn't say it, but what I thought was, surely your kid is not as cool as Simon and Garfunkel. But I was embarrassed at how tone deaf I had been to this conversation they were having. That open suitcase had only a minute ago been the ultimate sign of success in my eyes. But the very meaning of success shifted at least a little bit for me in that conversation. The reality of his life was more complex than I had been able to see from my vantage point, and that suitcase carried a very different weight now. This man knew the value of music, the ability of music to touch and transform people's lives. He knew that as much as anyone I have ever met. But still, he struggled to balance that dedication with the value of music, with the value of his family and his relationships and his kids. My unfolding sense of true success, of a life well lived, is first that it is a journey and not a destination, and that it is second, an increasing embrace of our values even in the face of an increasingly complex world. This reminds me of a poem by Naomi Shihab Nye. It says, "The boot is famous to the earth. more famous than the dress shoe, which is only famous to floors. I want to be famous, she says, in the way a pulley is famous, or a buttonhole. Not because it did anything spectacular, but because it never forgot what it could do. Remembering what we can do in the midst of all that must be done is the work of we, the future ancestors. Rabbi Tarfon spoke of this in the 1st century AD, saying, "It is not your responsibility to finish the work of perfecting the world, but you are not free to desist from it either." When I think of success, I think recently of this useful term that millennials have coined, the word adulting, which is to name the daily successes of small things. To say that it's worth celebrating when one accomplishes both the shopping of the groceries and the laundering of the laundry, particularly in a single day. But in Unitarian Universalist congregations, we who covenant to live for justice and equity and compassion, we know that success in its true sense is more than checking off to-do lists, and it's more than professional acclaim. My hope for my days and for yours, friends, is to attend to the complexity of our times with our best selves, to root ourselves in communities that are doing our best to honor our ancestors and future generations. This is the work of we, the future ancestors. My hope for us is to set aside the simplistic stories we've been told about who we are and who we are meant to be. Set aside the stories we've made up along the way about what success is supposed to look like, or what our gender is supposed to mean, or what kind of work has value enough, or whether systems of injustice are tolerable just because they are normal. Growing up at any age is about growing into our values, about adapting to change with grace and with courage, and about remembering what we can do even in the midst of all that must be done. When I think of these things, when I think of redefining success that it might align more deeply with our values, when I think of movement ancestors who lived into the complexity of their times, I sometimes remember a story about one of our Unitarian ancestors, William Ellery Channing. Now, Channing was a brilliant preacher here in Boston, where I live. And in the mid-1800s, he was a leader of Unitarianism, one of those credited with perhaps most defining it even. He is hailed as a model of religious leadership, dedicated to justice and a powerful voice for abolition in his time. But success is more about the journeying than the destination, and that was certainly true for our friend Channing, who wasn't always so vocal in his opposition to slavery. You see, while Channing had agreed with the goals of the abolitionists, while he was all for ending slavery, he was put off by the way they went about it. He was said that they were too passionate, they were too emotional, and in fact, they reminded him of the itinerant revivalists of his time, who he thought were much too passionate. Now, you should know that the only consistent thing in my life since college is my job as an itinerant revivalist, but I try not to take Channing's comments too personally. So one night in a forum, Samuel May, a more active abolitionist, had been listening in this meeting all night to Channing's criticisms of the movement. And unable to put off his impatience, his frustration any longer, he broke out and interrupted Channing, saying, "Dr. Channing, I am tired of these complaints. It is not our fault that those who might have conducted this great reform so much more prudently than us have left us to manage as we may. It is not our fault that those who might have pleaded for the enslaved so much more wisely and eloquently have been silent. We are not to blame, sir, that you have not spoken. And now that inferior men have begun to speak and act against what you acknowledge to be an awful system, it is not becoming in you to complain of us because we do it in an inferior style. This is what the kids would call a sick burn. It was so sick, in fact, that Channing was unable to answer this rebuke, and he accepted the challenge, saying, "Brother May, I have been silent too long." I love that this story depicts the very moment that Channing took up the work of a life that would resonate with his ancestors and his descendants. The moment he took up the work of attending to the crises of his time, not to finish it, but neither to desist from it. To take on the work that was his to do, despite the complexity of working with imperfect people in an imperfect movement and an imperfect world. And I love this story because I so often feel like I am in the place of Samuel May, where I end up fighting with so-called allies who theoretically share my values, but would rather criticize the work from afar than get scuffed up in joining the fray themselves. And I love this story also because I'm just as often in Channing's place, where I've blamed other people's failings for my own silence, where I have criticized the movement from afar while I did little to improve it. Times when I have delayed action, leaving my human family to suffer for the sake of some abstract sense of purity. Perhaps Channing had missed that day in school when the teacher explained that the hundreds of questions we still have about how to go about our days, they still add up to something, even when simplistic answers are elusive. Dear ones, our children will someday tell similar stories of us. They will tell stories of a time when the world was changing fast, when a global pandemic rearranged everything nearly overnight and we had to rebuild seemingly from scratch. They will tell stories of a time when climate chaos arrived with devastation in our cities and our neighborhoods, and how premeditated wealth inequality made it difficult to address. They will tell of a time when we put our neighbors in cages by the millions for nonviolent offenses, and a time when institutionalized segregation continued by funding our schools with local taxes based on segregated wealth. But our children, I hope, will also tell the stories of Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and the Sunrise movement. They will tell the stories of how we, the future ancestors, changed how the story ends. That there was a time when perhaps we came together even when the people were complicated, even when the movements and organizations were messy, even when the path before us wasn't clear. They will tell of those of us who covenanted to never forget what we could do, even when the list of things to do was overwhelming. The work of future ancestors, dear ones, is a journey, not a destination. And true success means an increasing embrace of our values, even in the face of increasing complexity. Writer and atheist prophet Ta-Nehisi Coates spoke of this. He said, "History is not solely in your hands, and still you are called to struggle, not because it assures you victory, but because it assures you an honorable and sane life." There was a time I believed that success was traveling the world with a famous band. And, well, just between you all and me, if Paul Simon called me up this evening, I'd be on the next plane, to be sure. But I also think of success now in a broader sense, as finding a way to support your family even when the minimum wage is too low and healthcare costs are too high. I think of it as nurturing the people who love you and finding ways to make the world better, even when we have more questions than answers about how to go about it. Love, which is the beginning and end of the story of Unitarian Universalism, is acting for compassion and for justice even when the people are complicated and the path is unclear. An honorable struggle that Coates talked about is taking up the work that is ours to do, not to finish it, but neither to desist from it. So, dear ones, let us live deeply into the journey we will not regret, aspiring to the fame of the boots and the buttonhole, never forgetting what we can do. And let's love each other deeply, building up the messy and beautiful and holy communities that make this life worth celebrating. May it be so, and may we make it so.
May it be so. As those of us who embrace this faith together, we are in a season in our congregation of visioning and stewardship. And to speak on her experience and support of stewardship is Carol Stanfill today. She's a longtime Unitarian Universalist, and she's among the candidates who is standing for election to our Board of Trustees in December. And so I welcome Carol.
Hello. I will just speak a bit about my journey to this church. I've been a member for about 10 months now. We just moved to Las Cruces about 10 months ago. When I was a child, we never attended church. I guess our family was Christian because every night my mom made us say, "Now I lay me down to sleep." That was all I knew of religion. But once in a while, we'd live in a neighborhood where the school bus would come by on Sunday morning and pick up kids and take them to Sunday school. There were 4 of us, so my mom thought that was great. She could read the paper and have a cup of coffee and send us away. And Sunday school to me meant coloring sheets and Kool-Aid and graham crackers, so it was fun. But it seems like we'd go once or twice to a church and then we'd move away. My dad was a sailor, so we moved all the time. I was the one in Sunday school going, wait a minute. A whale swallowed him and then spit him out again? I don't think that could happen. Even when I was this big, I still remember the Sunday school teachers going, no, you just have to believe. I was thinking, you turn around and you turn into a pillar of salt? What's the point of that story? How could somebody walk on water? None of this made sense to me. The one that really got me was when they said, God knows how many hairs are on your head when you're born. And I thought, I don't think I had any hairs on my head. So does he know now how many? And how do you count every single hair? So I was constantly analyzing. And when you base all of your religion on these child's Bible stories, it doesn't work for me. And I think there are a lot of kids it doesn't work for. Later on, as a teenager, I kept thinking, everybody seems to know something that I don't know, and everywhere I went, people were Christian. They believed very strongly. I went to a women's retreat, I remember one time, and all these ladies that I'd known from where I worked and all were crying and rolling on the ground and speaking in tongues, and it was very educational, but those kind of things never fit for me. But I kept thinking, everybody believes something, and I don't believe it. So I felt really left out until I was complaining to my son-in-law one day that I couldn't find a place where I seemed to fit. And he said, you need to read this book. So I read the book called A Chosen Faith, and we have it in our library. One thing I noticed as I read through it was the authors would say, a lot of people read this book and keep saying, wait, that's how I've always believed, or this is definitely my tribe because that's what I've always thought. And I was doing the same thing. As I read through it, I kept going, yes, finally I found a religion that seems to fit perfectly for me. So I was in Arkansas at the time, and after I read the book, I decided to look in the internet and find a UU church. So I went to Hot Springs, Arkansas, which is about 45 miles from my house. And it just so happened that I arrived on the day they were having their congregational meeting. And they don't have a minister. We had our own building, though. But when I walked in, they said, you might not want to stay today because it's just a meeting. But I decided I've driven 45 miles, I'm going to stay. And I was so impressed by a group that didn't talk about abstract things, but real things in church. And they worked with a democratic process, which seems so different for a church. So I joined the church, and by the second week, I was secretary on the board. And about a month later, I was president of the board. It was probably 25 to 35 members, no minister. All they did was say, hey, we got a new girl in town, let's make her president. A 2-year term, so I thought I could do that. Well, at the end of 2 years, it was, come on, who wants to be president? Nobody. So I did it for about 6 years. During that time, I got more and more enthusiastic about UU. I went to General Assembly about 4 times now, where all the UUs from around the world get together. And if you haven't done that, I really recommend it. There's something magical about being in a room with 4,000 people singing the songs in our hymnal. And everybody there agreeing with the principles. It's just a different group. I went to their leadership training school for a week in Texas at the college. It was really interesting. But in conclusion, I'd like to say that I started out going 40 miles, 45 miles to church. Then we moved away closer, so it was only 30 miles to church. And then we decided to move to Texas and lived about 100 miles from San Antonio, the closest church. And I actually drove over there one day, all the way over, to see what their church was like, and never found their church. I drove 100 miles. Somehow it's behind a mall or another building, or I don't know where it is. Never did find it. We ended up missing the mountains too much that we had known in Colorado, so we came to Cloudcroft then. And it was only 30 miles down the hill to go to Alamogordo and go to church. So I went now and then. Then my husband decided he didn't like the cold. We bought a pecan grove up in Caballo. So I was between coming to church here and going to church in Silver City, about the same distance from up there. Well, COVID hit and I couldn't go to church anywhere. So I listened to y'all on Zoom during COVID, and the very first day that everybody came back, and I don't know what the sanctuary looked like before, but y'all were talking about how nice the new sanctuary was, and I came that day and just met the most friendly people. It came time for the women's retreat, and I always liked that kind of thing. We still have our cabin in Cloudcroft, so I didn't know a soul, but I signed up for the women's retreat and was just delighted to meet so many of the ladies. And then when you started meeting regularly, we decided to sell the pecan grove and move down here. And now I'm 4 miles from a UU church. Finally. No more driving, and I used to have to plan for groceries and everything when I went so far to the city. But yesterday I came to 2 meetings, and I just pop over here, 4 miles. I was so impressed when I first came here, not only with this beautiful sanctuary that apparently looks better than it used to, And the books to give away in the library here is fantastic, and all the room for Sunday school, for RE. I found out that you had so many great committees and activities and things like that. So it was, all the time when I was growing up, it was so awkward to try to believe that those prayers I really felt, and to praise God and things like that. It was always a lie, though. But here, I don't find with a UU any problem with talking about things that are important, like homelessness or refugees or taking care of the environment or things like that. Those are not awkward conversations. What was awkward was saying, I was saved and this is how my life was changed, when that didn't happen for me. So I would like to just say thank you that to the UU Faith and to a group like this, that I was able to meet y'all. And pretty soon, in December, I will have been a member for a year. So plan to stay a long time this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. And a little bird told me that after 1 week of stewardship, we have over $50,000 in pledges. The operation and outreach of our church needs your input and your contributions. This is a perfect time to think about what you can give back. I would like to remind you that we support organizations identified by the Social Justice Committee with our Change for Change program. This quarter's recipient for Change donations is the NAACP of Doña Ana County, NAACP-DAC. You can give to them by putting your change in the basket or by writing Change for Change on the note line of your check. In a moment, the greeters will pass among you with the offering baskets. Please give generously. Before they do that, let us consider these words by Edward L. Schempp. Unitarian Universalism is faith in people, hope for tomorrow's child, confidence in a continuity that spans all time. It looks not to a perfect heaven, but toward a good earth. It is respectful of the past, but not limited to it. It is trust in growing and conspiracy with change. It is spiritual responsibility for a moral tomorrow.
Ilululu, finululu, ilululu, finululu, ilululu, finululu, ilululu, finululu, Shirakayam Ilu Ofinu Mabe Shirakayam Ofinu Mabe Shirakayam Were our mouths as full of song? She's of songs as the sea. Were all my halls were this full of songs as the sea. We could not give thanks enough. Ilulu, finu, nu, nu, male, shirakayam. Ilulu, finu, nu, nu, male, shirakayam. Our closing song this morning is There's a River Flowing in My Soul. The song was written by a woman named Fea Ora Rose Toure. She's not only a singer-songwriter and a poet and also a playwright, but she also founded just about a dozen organizations for racial justice over the years. And in addition to all of that, I don't know, maybe in her spare time, she was the first black woman judge of Alabama. And just a few years ago, in retirement, she was arrested for civil disobedience, protesting the construction of a Confederate monument in her hometown. And so I invite you to join in singing this song in honor of her and all of those who are of communities doing our best to address the crises of our time. Let's see if we can get the drum in this shot a little bit. Here we go. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. And it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. Let's try that. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. And it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my heart. And it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my heart, in my mind. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing in my mind. And it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my mind and in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. And it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. And it's telling me that I'm somebody. And it's telling me that I'm somebody. One more. And it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul.
Some invitations that are pretty exciting. So as you may have gathered, today is Visioning Action Day, and we invite you to join us after the service to have lunch and participate in an all-church activity that will help define who we are as a church. We can work in a small group to plan our next actions, either in community building within this church, or community outreach, or church structure and governance. And again, Chef Bill Fitzgerald has prepared additional foods. So if you did not RSVP, you are still invited. And there is a virtual Blessing of the Animals service for a roundtable. Last year's service was a big hit. This year we have a guest speaker, Zoe Weil. She is author of 7 books, including Amazon #1 bestseller, The World Becomes What We Teach, Educating a Generation of Solutionaries, and you need to register to log in. And you can look at the back of your order of service for all of those links that are there. There are new UU classes coming beginning next week. There's still time to register for them, whether you're new to our church or a longtime member. There's always something new to learn about our history, our way of organizing, our theology, and particulars of this congregation. Get to know others and make new friends. Sign up today, and it will be from 11:30 to 1:30 beginning next Sunday through November 6th. And there is information for where to register. Today is the last day for the gallery show, so make some time to pop in there and see that show. And also today is a concert with the Massey Valley Community Band. And it's this afternoon at 3 o'clock in the NMSU Music Building. We have 2 members who are in that band, at least. That's Jim Basler's son, Jim Basler, and Jennifer Trantham. They're going to be playing. There's great music from the movies, and I have to say, Jim Basler wrote this announcement. Many members are music teachers getting a chance to toot their own horns. So the concert is free, and you're really close by if you stay for the visioning activities. Gail. And 2 more members. I kind of thought, because I saw you out of the corner of my eyes, and so we have more members. So after the visioning activities, head on over there. It's just down the street.
Beloveds, our days together add up to something. May we future ancestors go forth in honorable struggle, even when simplistic answers are elusive. May we go increasingly embracing our values, even in the face of increasing complexity. May we go forth aspiring to the fame of the boot and the buttonhole, remembering always what we can do, even in the midst of all that must be done. Go in peace, go in love, and go and be blessed as you are a blessing to others.
Please join me in extinguishing the flame. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
good to be with you all today. Go in peace.